What is going on, folks? It is Steiner here with another episode of Secondhand Talent. Thank you, of course, to Mark Spusa for the art. Thank you to Luke Chu and Tenacious Toys for the desk candy. And thank you to my tiny co-host, Tiny Steiner. And most importantly, thank you, our readers, listeners, and viewers around the world. And thank you to this week's guest, producer, engineer, musician, and founder of Joshua Tree Recording Studio, Tommy Dietrick. Tommy, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me, man. I'm excited to be on and chat about all things production and music. I really like the premise of recognizing the people who, do all these crafts, right? That sometimes we forget about. And, when we started chatting before the roll, I was thinking, I'm an engineer in a recording studio, but some of my favorite people behind the scenes are the guys who do it live. I personally do not like to do live sound. In fact, I don't like to do it. I just don't. And the reason is the guys that are really good, right? Here, I'm already like talking about something other than what I do, but they're geniuses. But here's the difference. As a producer and engineer in a recording studio, when the studio gremlins come, which they do, we were just talking about that, something will happen and something will kick out, a channel will drop. I'm an analog studio, and we'll get into that. I mean, analog and then some. But when I was, really doing music in my bands, those live sound engineers that really knew their stuff, it was like unbelievable, because you get this experience that as a performer, you feel so content. When you have the monitor mixed right, you have the front, you can tell the front of house sounds amazing. Those people, I just want to give a shout out to some of those live sound engineers before we talk about production in the studio.
You're absolutely right, and I will forgive you, Mother Superior, for jumping the gun and asking what secondhand talent means to you, but we'll get to that in a second.
Yeah.
But shout out to my friend Marshall Towski. In July of 2024, he is one of the most dynamic sound engineers, live front of house that I've ever seen. And over these 4 shows in July of 2024, how he made this room sound the way that it did is still beyond my reckoning.
Isn't that wild?
I don't understand, based on physics and like my understanding of like acoustics, how he was able to make the band sound as magnificent as they are, and as they did as they were playing the shows, like in a room that was built the way that it was, which was so incredibly awkward. But getting back to my opening question here, the first time you were approached with via our wonderful producer Mario with the idea of being on a podcast called Secondhand Talent, before knowing what it was about, what did you think of when you first heard the term Secondhand Talent?
Well, I mean, I think Mario laid it out pretty concisely, and like I was saying in a bit of the intro there, there's so many people that contribute to a production, whether it's in a studio recording, music setting, a movie, a play, all these things that these sort of, I mean, you could say unsung heroes. Ultimately, my job is as a engineer and producer is to facilitate what the band, the artist who's coming in, wants to achieve. And the nice thing about when you have the experience and the tools, is you're able to not get in the way of that, right? So we're kind of like these people where, if we're doing it right, when you do it right, the talent gets to shine, and then I'll happily take a back seat, even if it's like finding guitar tones and finding drum sounds and things that like may seem easy, or may seem like the simple thing to do, but really it's a lot of effort to make things come together, whether it is live or in the studio or a movie, whatever it is. So all these people who contribute, it is nice to recognize them. It's nice to hear, what you said at the start, about what 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 uh, what it means to be one of these people.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I think this might be the first time that we actually got the answer of just like exactly what the show is, and that just goes to show. Talking about secondhand talent, I would be remiss if I didn't mention how just how essential Mario has become as our associate producer. It's not something that I ever really sought out. It's something that he wanted to do to be a part of the show,
Yeah.
and the show would not be the same without him. And I remind him as often as I can when we have our meetings, that how much I appreciate him and his input, because he will give me straight up honest feedback, and that's what you really need in your corner, especially when you only have one other team member. So
Yeah.
it really is something that's incredible that he laid it out. But one element of it that I think you kind of touched on that I want to build on, part of my definition of secondhand talent, and I'm curious to hear your reaction to this, is that
Hmm.
it's talent that is no less, but often overlooked.
Yeah. That makes perfect sense. Like in my example at the start, I as someone who used to tour and hit the road, and when you get to those venues where you'd see that guy running around, right? And he's going from one side of the stage to the other side of the stage to the drum kit. He's going, to the monitor board. He's running back to front of house. He's going to get fucking coffee. Oh, I don't know if we can swear. He's going to get
You can swear,
coffees.
you can say whatever the
He's
fuck you want. Secondhand
okay.
talent.
All right, cool. He's going to get coffees, and then all of a sudden, you're up there, and you're like, man, it sounds good. And then as somebody whose literally obsession is sonic, textures, that's like my it's an obsession since I was a teenager that's just never gone away, and it never will. Those people, man, they make the experience for not only the crowd, whoever's there, they make the experience good for the people performing. And I mean, we do need to celebrate those people. And engineers, the funny, I'll say this: when I'm in the studio, and sometimes that's just an engineering job, or supposedly. But what I'll say is most of us experienced engineers, we're always kind of wearing that producer cap no matter what. And so what that means is, you're basically and going with the theory of sort of not always getting the accolade or the credit for it, right? So it's like if you hand a beautifully crafted, well recorded album, which then when I work with a big artist, it leaves the studio and all these other hands will touch it, right? So there's a mix engineer, there's probably someone who's working with him editing, and then there's a mastering engineer later. But if you're handing them something where it's like, hey, we got the big sound, we got the rad drum sound, we got and this is a whole equipment talk, and it's opens up Pandora's box. But to your point, there's like a whole bunch of us who, like, I spoke to an engineer friend of mine, I won't name who, and he was like, man, I record this album, and I nail every sound on there for the band. He's literally doing all the knobs and making all the decisions, and then he hands it off to someone who mixes it in an afternoon or a day, and they sort of get all the credit. But truth be told, it is a collaborative process. Some of the records I do, I will wear all the hats:
No,
engineer, producer, mixer, and even if I usually take a break from it, then mastering sometimes.
no, absolutely. Like you said, it is a collaborative process. There's something that you had mentioned that perked my ear up. Maybe it'll come back to me. But prior to, or what was your, you mentioned the term sonic obsession.
Yeah.
What
Yes.
what was the prompt for that sonic obsession? What was it
Oh,
that launched you into this
yeah.
space?
That's a really great question because I wanted to bring this up. So if I was to trace back like the sort of formative foundation for what has driven me to do a career in music and the arts is I went my very first ever concert. I was 10 years old and I saw Pink Floyd. And and I loved the records growing up. My dad was I'm Gen X. My dad was a boomer, and he had brought me up on all the classics. So we're talking Beatles, Kinks, Stones, Pink Floyd, you name it, all the classics. So when I went to see that at 10 years old, and people were like judging my dad because he brought me to this big concert with 40 or 50,000 people. I just remember being like, "Oh my god, what the actual fuck?" 10 years old. And the sounds coming at you, it hits you. And then once you have that experience, my daughter's 14 now, and she's got the same thing. Once you have the experience of like whatever that feeling is, that's this creative force, it stays with you. And then you get kind of, for me it's like you're addicted to it. So sonically, the whole idea of being obsessed with sound really formed from those early memories of going to shows. And I'll say that my second few shows were between 10 and 14. I saw Violent Femmes, Jane's Addiction, the Pixies. I was really young and I was going to these shows, and so I was just like this kid. I'm like, oh my god, I'm usually the only kid, right? And so fast forwarding from there, I ended up being one of the youngest in my kind of San Francisco scene in the early 90s. I started playing clubs at like 15 years old, and I was the youngest one there. And I just liked recording. I would always want to go be where people were recording. And so I started out with a 4-track, the classic Tascam 4-track. I had a couple of those. And I had an 8-track. And then I had a 16-track, and it goes on. So the thought was I really enjoyed being wherever people were recording and being in studios way before I ever had a studio. I would, go to these places in San Francisco, and just be in awe of like who are these people in front of the console that know how to make stuff sound fucking cool, and you do have like the talent of the band, but you need someone who knows how to use what I call the lenses of
Hmm.
recording to really bring out a sound, right?
No, I like that term, the lenses of recording, because that's exactly what it does. Same as a lens, it magnifies the power and creativity of the band. It really is an apt metaphor. And was it? I mean, production is not a step that people take often from like right into that age. When did you start playing your first instrument?
Oh yeah. So I think my first instrument I still love playing it was bass. I got a bass guitar. I think it was like $180 Fender, Squire P bass. When I want to say 12 or 13, something like that. My brother had gotten a guitar, and so it just made sense. It's like, well, if you're going to play guitar, then we're going to need a bass. So I played bass all through high school in bands. Like I said, I just kind of like dove in, and just it never, that part of performance and creativity have always been like paramount, like the thing that's been driving
And when
everything.
production enter the mix as something that you felt like was something that you wanted to kind of get your hands behind? Because I will say, and this was what I was trying to remember earlier,
Yeah.
one of the ways that this show has changed the way that I go to concerts myself and this is something that I've noticed, in retrospect and as it happens now that I've noticed it and become aware of it, but since starting the show, I've made it a point to try and say thank you or I appreciate you to every single
Mhm.
person that's working that night.
Mhm.
Um, Not that I didn't before, but I make a much more concerted effort to do it now, um, than I did previously because I have a after having talked to so many people who do it, all the different aspects of it from stage management to lighting to
Yeah.
sound, you have a much deeper appreciation for everything that goes into it. And I'm curious what your first um, you know, beyond playing music, was it out of want to record your own music that you
Yeah.
looked into production? Okay, interesting.
Yeah.
Tell us about that.
Well, and to your point, as I get older, it's not even I try to be sort of grateful and thankful for all the people, like, I go to get a coffee and I'm like, man, you know, I appreciate that I can go get a coffee. It's like, we're in this first world where everything is just sort of always there. But I try to spread, I think, sort of a vibe of appreciation and gratitude as much as I can. That sound like crazy hippie, but I did go to UC Santa Cruz, so that's where I got my degree. But you said what drove me to start production, and what drove me that was the idea that I love. Well, first of all, I'll give you another, expression of what I think is a fair, sort of metaphor. So I think what I was getting at was the thing that drove me into production was this idea. I've always enjoyed what I call painting with sound. So as a songwriter, um, I'm not always someone who would just pick up a guitar and write a song. I have definitely, but a lot of times it's like me grabbing some really rad piece of equipment and putting it through some, sort of a juicy preamp into a juicy compressor or whatever it is, and getting kind of like some dense sonic signature. And it's like, oh, what is that? That sounds so amazing. And it's like a Moog with this heavy, EQ, some tube saturation EQ, and you're like, oh, that can turn into that feeling can be a whole track. So that I tend to write all my records were always written sort of in the studio. They were all very much studio albums. In fact, they were hard to play live sometimes because of that. But again, painting with sound, and when I started to get into recording, whatever band I was in, even before I wrote songs, I was like the bass player and I had a 4 track. I was the bass player and I had an 8 track. And I was like, hey, come over to my garage and let's record something. And that was how it started, was being this teenager and just really being fascinated with um how you captured tone, how you created how you turn these electromagnetic waves into feelings. And I always love what I love about music is you're building something from where there was nothing, and so that to me, that listening in the headphones every night to a mix. I'm working on some new songs right now, which sadly, that's another topic. I've been so busy with my career, my family, and I'm building a house, and actually that's why you see behind me. I'm not actually in the studio today. I'm at my house that I'm finishing building. But it was the best place to have a quiet sort of interview. So hopefully that answered some of your question.
No, I think so. That and then some. I feel like that's a great explanation. I mean, I really identify with the term, painting with sound. I think
Hmm.
that one of the hallmarks of any great songwriter or composer is to create a soundscape, a landscape
Hmm.
based on sound that tells a story in and of itself. When I
Hmm.
think about a band like Fish, right? You think of some of the longer composed songs, and that's a soundscape. That is a work of art painted by sound. And in the
Yep.
same way that you have a blank canvas, and once you apply paint, it becomes a painting. There's dead air, and you add notes to it, and it becomes a song. So I
Hmm.
really appreciated with that, and I do like that as well, with your instrument because, and bassists do get maligned quite a bit. There's plenty of jokes about bassists and drummers, but, one of the things that you do have the opportunity to do as part of the low end and the rhythm is
Mm-hmm.
creating that soundscape and creating that, background, think of, down how Fish opens Down with Disease with Mike
Hmm.
hammering on his bass. Like that's setting the tone for what the song is about to be. And that's
Hmm.
all in that instrument. So I do think you do have that opportunity with the bass to, as you say, paint with sound. I think that's a really
Yeah.
appropriate metaphor.
Yeah. And with, I should say though, in my endeavors musically in my bands and bands I played with, eventually I did go to guitar, but I always find myself coming back to bass. I love, I'm not a shredder on guitar or whatever. I'm like more of a melody guy and a rhythm guy, but I've always enjoyed the ability to be multi-instrumental,
Mm.
especially when I get artists that come in the studio where maybe it's just like one person or two people and they're like, hey, can you play a little guitar? Sure. Can you play a little bass? Sure, of course. I mean, and I'm not precious about it. I'm not like looking for again, going to the theme of the show. It's like whatever serves the song. So I'll wear whatever hat. Like I have some jobs in the studio where really there's another producer there and I just do whatever is needed. And other times the band wants the feedback like, hey, how do I get this sound? How do I get this guitar tone? How do we get this drum sound? What's that mic you're using? And, to what you said earlier, you know, Motown was one of the first to get the bass and drum sound that everybody wanted later. They were doing it way before all the white dudes were doing it. They like figured it out and they
Some
had
of the
this.
greatest samples some of the greatest samples in history come from Motown tracks. They had it down
They
to the
wanted
point
to
where they were naming shuffles after them.
they wanted to move the speakers is what I say. It was like, and you listen to some of those recordings from 60s and 70s, they were just doing it and all the other studios started to go, whoa, there's this big bottom end. And I know that like it's kind of um over the decades, it's kind of like there were eras where like I want to say 90s too, where like the speaker systems today are so good. You can use 30 hertz, you can use 20 hertz, whatever it is. You get really down there. But there was an era when I was growing up and I was watching the engineers recording my bands. They would like go to the racks and just like turn 20 hertz off, turn 40 hertz off, right? The really low stuff. And that was because at the time, I think there's a lot of great stuff that came out of the 90s, right? Obviously, but there was certainly like limitations with sort of the speaker systems that people could just buy off the shelf. And now it's like, oh my God, we all have these systems in our houses and our cars that even small systems that sound absolutely amazing, right? And you know, I always look to some of the greats for inspiration for what I'm trying to accomplish in my world. And to the point, going back to obsession, where, I've collected and amassed all of those pieces of gear that I would see were using and working on my favorite recordings. I would freeze frame. I'd sit there with my friend and we freeze frame where, like, what's going on at Abbey Road? What mic is that? Oh, it's a D12, right? The original D12. I have one. Or like, oh, what vocal mic that? That's Telefunken Elam 251. Got to get that, and it's just, you start to really get obsessed because the tonalities that you get from these signature pieces, like I call them the big boy toys. Does that make sense?
Like a
you know,
Telefunken U47 with
yeah.
leather.
Another great mic. And the reason I collected, I have like 100 mics, right? The reason I have so many mics is because everyone will sound good on a sort of a different mic and preamp. So this obsession on the engineering side, which is still um, like I said, effectively producing because you know when you hear someone sing, sometimes I'll have people just like um, sing just in the studio, have someone just sing in the control room, get a sense of what they sound like, and go, oh well, you know what, you're going to sound good on this vintage Neumann, or you're going to sound good on uh, an 800G or whatever mic, and you can really tailor it. The sonic signatures based off of what the song is asking for.
So what was it that prompted you to branch out and start your own production studio as opposed to either working as a producer in another studio or you know, being with a label or anything like that? Because stepping out, I mean, in LA,
Mm-hmm.
or
Mm-hmm.
in that area,
Yeah.
it's a big market,
Mm-hmm.
yes, but it's a saturated market. I don't know if
Yep.
over or under, but it is a saturated market.
Mm-hmm.
What was the impetus or the proving ground point for you to branch out on your own and create your initial studio in Encino?
Yeah. So when I was kind of starting out, I was really wanting to create I built the original studio in a house in Encino, and that was I mean, I was a kid, it's in my early 20s, 2001. So we're going back to the beginning of the aughts. And I built it really for me initially. It was like, oh, I'm gonna, I think when I started, I maybe had 4 or 5 or 6 microphones, maybe. I had an old analog desk that I had bought from Black Market Music, and that had been used on the Rolling Stones album Steel Wheels. And it was, this was at a time when people actually were not investing so much in the analog domain because they were much smaller, easier to handle compact mixers on the market. People were really getting into Pro Tools and doing things just differently. Whereas, I don't know, I always liked the mojo and the magic of the analog. So anyway, so I started doing this, building out a studio in my house that I rented, which happened to have a back house garage that was converted by a previous tenant. And the previous tenant was a producer who had worked, I can't remember his name now, who had actually worked with like Aerosmith and all these people. Like
Oh
he was
shit.
like
All
some kind
right.
of old school, he was older than me. And when I answered the ad on Craigslist, I think it was like, you'll dig this. It was like, 3-bedroom house for rent, perfect for musicians and parties. Who writes that? Like who writes that
Someone who
down?
understands the assignment.
So of course, and I was living on Fairfax in Pico in LA, not too far from Hollywood and West Hollywood and all that. And but I was looking for a house because I was in an apartment, and you can't really do, I had a little setup in the apartment, but it wasn't really, I couldn't be loud. I had neighbors above me and to the, all around me, right? So I
It's hard to
moved.
go full swing in an apartment,
Oh,
man.
dude, it's forget it. So I sort of like packed up and I went to this. I met with the guy who was renting the house, then I met with the owner of the house, and then they liked me even though I was a young kid. They rented it to me, and immediately, like upon moving in, I started setting up the first studio. And that first studio was, I mean, I still have it's like it was legendary. I never knew who was going to come through the door, right? I never knew because I was always, to be fair, that the indie guy. I've done some work with some really big artists, but like I still think of myself as the scrappy indie guy that you kind of have to know about. And
Let's put a pin in that real quick
yeah,
because I want to talk about, I mean, that makes sense as an indie person wanting to branch out independently. It's kind of in the name.
yeah,
I'm curious, you talk about not knowing who's walking through the door.
hmm
Is the amalgam of the people who did walk in the door in those first 5 years what prompt you to help found, Desert Stars?
yes, yes, 100%.
How did that come about? Because it's one thing to have an independent studio. running an independent festival is a
Mhm.
whole nother can of
Oh,
worms,
yeah.
and that's something that we've interviewed, people who do just that alone, and it's a whole lot of a whole lot.
Yeah, dude.
What
It's a lot.
prompted you to step out doing what you're doing as busy as you are, and as you said, the early aughts to start
Yeah.
Desert Stars with the bands you were pulling, which are, I mean, among others, notes, folks, Dinosaur Jr., The
Mhm.
Kills, Dandy Warhols, Alan Parsons. I mean,
I don't
we're
even
Bulls
believe it.
fans here, folks. Come on now.
Yeah.
Everybody
Uh,
knows.
yeah, so that's, it was a natural progression. What had happened was somewhere around 2000, 4 or 5, I think it was 4. A friend of ours had done this like generator burn party out in Jawbone Canyon, which is like out near it's escaping me right now. Is it Lancaster? So there was this independent spirit was really vibrant in the early 2000s in Los Angeles, right? So there was the Silver Lake scene, Echo Park, yada yada, and things were kind of just happening, and everyone was sort of doing it themselves. Of course, there was Hollywood, and there was all that, but what was the joke? Oh, I can't even think about going past Sunset in La Brea or whatever it was. There was some joke or something, and it was you know LA. So I'm from the Bay Area, by the way. So
Oh,
when I moved down to Los Angeles, it was specifically because I wanted to do things that I didn't see were possible really up in the Bay Area. I mean, you could be the big fish in the small pond, which is kind of what a lot of my friends were in San
yeah,
Francisco. So to kind of elaborate on that, I just I started working with all these bands, and there was not really an outlet for independent bands to go play any kind of festival back then. I mean, you have to think, and I'm not trying to toot my own horn or whatever, but when we started out, Coachella was like 2 years old, right? It was all brand new, but none of us were big enough bands to go do that, And so we had done this party in the desert in Jawbone Canyon, and it was so much fun. We stayed up all night. People were all kinds of crazy. There may have been some mushrooms involved, and
allegedly.
allegedly there was. I'll tell you a funny story about that later if you want to ask again about that night. Um, so this kind of kicked off this idea that like, well, there was like a bubbling sort of scene, and the biggest in that scene would have been bands like at the time BRMC, Black Rebel Motorcycle Club. There was the Dandy Warhols. There, friends of mine who were doing it, who were really doing it. As far as independent music was concerned, they were doing it. And eventually, we just started going, well, what if we get one or two of these bands that happen to be people we know, and they can be the headliner, right? They'll be the main sort of draw, and then we'll get all these other sort of bands that are out there trying to make it happen. And what I'll say is, at the time, even radio wasn't really supporting us. You'd get KCRW would kick in and play here bands of ours here and there. Indie 103 started to be really good and supporting a lot of our bands, but then they went under. And so it was like we decided to just create our own outlets. And so when the festival started, we had no clue. We had no money. We had no production experience. We didn't really know what the fuck we were doing. But it ended up being so fun and working every year. And we started that at Pappy and Harriet's. And in fact, we were one of the very first, apart from Cracker Campout, to do anything like it out there. And this was like there was no Golden Voice, there was no Knitting Factory, there was no KCRW hadn't even done anything there yet. We started that early aughts scene. There was a collective, and now that place is so famous. It's like forget about it. you know,
So
you
with
sorry.
With oh, I was gonna say, just with the success then of the festival and this, I would imagine that that cycled back to the studio.
Yep.
What was it that prompted the move to Joshua Tree? Was it just a matter of wanting more space to breathe, like personally? Because I do know about it from what Mario's told me is that, there is a lot of space and from the conversations
Mhm.
that I've had with other people there, but I'm curious if it was a lifestyle choice or if it was a production choice, combination of both. What was the impetus to uproot and move?
Yeah, I think I felt like my time, being in the city was ready to expire. I also, was at the same place when I started the studio in 2001. I was there for 15 years, and at some point, part of it was just necessary. The landlord had called me and said, you know, because this was an older home, right? So it was the old 50s style house still, and
Mm,
everywhere
mhm.
around me were McMansions. All my neighbors were Mc. There was a little house, and I think for a long time my neighbors were like, "Is he a drug dealer?" There's all these people in leather jackets going in and out of there, right? Because they'd go in and they'd walk through and they go the back. The backyard is where the back house was, and it was a pretty big property for no, I really. And then the neighbors were like, "Oh, that's just Tommy. He's a music guy, or whatever." But so when the landlord told me that they were going to sell the prop, or they were going to actually knock the house down and build a McMansion to sell it for $3 million or whatever, which they did end up doing. And so I looked around, and I did go and wander through parts of the city, and it was like, dude, rents. I mean, forget rents now, forget about it. But rents
Mm.
even then were forget about it. And so I had first come to Joshua Tree on one of my first trips to Los Angeles to be join a band called Small Stone, which I had played bass in on Bump Records. And that first couple of visits that I made to come to Hollywood and LA to play with my friend James Ambrose, and Rick Miami from Jonestown was in that band. And they took me out. Friends of mine had taken me out to Joshua Tree. So this is 99 or 2000, first time I ever went out here. And now I live here. So there's a history that spans 25 or 6 years. And so when it came time, I go, you know what? I think I'm kind of done with the madness of the city. And, it's like I lived in Encino too. I was a suburb. So, and I did enjoy it, but it's like now when I go back, I just feel, so it's claustrophobic for me. So it was time. It was time. I made the move, and, um, you
And
know,
in in that movement, to Joshua Tree, did that and I can understand, when you talked a little bit before about, your amassed collection and anyone working analog, you're working with a bunch of hardware.
hmm
Hardware, it takes up space, so
yeah.
that makes a lot of sense to me. And yeah, and as those suburbs began to become more and more part of pretty much Metro LA,
hmm
you kind of have that real decision to make. And it's interesting to hear that it was based on past experiences, and I'm curious if the move saw you bring in any sort of different clientele that you weren't exposed to in the past.
Yeah. Yes. I would say. So what happened when I moved? I've been here now for 10 years. For 10 years, and when I moved from the city was like, I don't want to say turn and burn, but it was. I had a lot of the indie crowd would come and go, so I could have 2 or 3 bands in there every week. And I was booking hundreds of sessions by the end, if you can believe that, as an independent without even an agent. And so when I moved out here, there's this couple things changed. The most noticeable was bands would want to come and stay for a week or 2 weeks or
Mm,
sometimes 3 weeks or
sure.
more. Even I've had bands stay for a month, where we just live it. We just make an album. And the current configuration of the studio, um, I have a lodging operation through my partner that I rent the space from. And so bands will stay, it's immersive. It's just a completely different thing than what it was happening in LA, because people would want to, just really live it. And they didn't go back to their apartment or their house, when the day was done, they stayed. And then it becomes like, now we're having a bonfire, or now we're having a meal together, and now we're going to go on a hike, and all of those things, which actually, all of that made it like a even more. I already love my job, right? But that was like, whoa, I could never go back now to doing it any other way. I just can't. And so I'm grateful that I, in a way, that when the rug kind of sort of the rug pull happened at the old studio, that I was able to redo it, rebuild it here. And I'm in the second location now since I moved here.
But I think again, the longevity of being in just two locations over the last almost 2.5 decades is,
Hmm.
speaks for itself. I think that that's testament to the quality of your work and the capability that you have to continue to bring in high caliber clientele. And before I move on to this next question, you have a list of notable collaborations
Hmm.
on
Hmm.
your site, and we actually have one crossover on that
Okay.
list. And I'm
Yeah.
curious to hear about your experience. KRS-One.
Oh yeah. Oh, I love that you asked that. I love that you asked that.
So
Yeah.
in 2013, so I was one of the where I honed my interview skills was on the radio at WZRD at Northeastern 88.3
Oh, okay.
FM.
Yeah.
And for Nest Fest, it wound up being the last year that it happened. um, I brought out KRS-One for the festival, and my mouse pad is actually a picture of me and him, and
Yeah.
on it says, "I know because of KRS-One." And when I saw that on your page, I was like, oh, I cannot let this interview go by without asking, what was that interaction? How did that happen, and what was that like? Because I think Chris is an incredible human being. It was amazing to get to just cipher with him. Like I'm been so curious to ask you about your experience with him.
Well, so then so he's just a great guy, right? So it's just like this was one of those experiences. I'm again always was the indie guy. I was always like, my scene was like, Silver Sun pickups and the whole Echo Park thing that was happening. Everything from the Ravenettes and the Dandies. That was kind of more like where I came from. But one day I got a knock on the studio door. I can't remember. Maybe his wife at the time booked it, and so I opened the door and I'm like, oh, I recognize this dude. And he's like, hey, I'm Chris, or KRS-One. And I'm like, yeah, man, I know you. Come on in. So I know you are, and we actually really hit it off. I had a blast. I had just a total blast working with him because I have a signed copy of his book, The Gospel of Hip Hop, that he had just
Mm,
put out. This is like 2000. So the studio had been up for a minute now. As we're going toward like I think 2008, 9, 10, and
mm,
he came and he did three what we call mixtapes.
mm,
So it wasn't always like in that world because they're constantly churning out hip hop world. There's a lot of stuff that comes out, and sometimes there's the big official release where they spend a lot of time and they do the whole thing, like bigger production. These were like, I mean, we did a lot of songs together. I think we did 20 some odd songs. They were just like he wanted to come in and do things and knock some things out for his fan base. And anyway, I couldn't say anything about this guy. He is infectious in that he has such a good time in the studio. He gets this like grin on his face, and he's like this, almost like this little kid. He's just like, oh, he gets, and then he liked me because I didn't do things like the guys he worked with. I was coming from rock and indie, right? So he was like, hey, can you chop this up for me? I'm like, yeah, whatever you want me to do. And I'm doing the sampling and things like this. But I didn't do it the way he was used to. I wasn't using the same bag of tricks that the hip hop and R&B guys were doing. Um, and so he really
well,
enjoyed that.
that really kind of mirrors the experience. Hi, my name's Chris is exactly how he introduced himself to me. And you know, I imagine his experience with festival organizers is that, they're pretty rigid, and that they, you go on at this time and you do this. And there was like at one point, I think he was just like freestyling, just like practicing, and I just like started
Yeah,
up a beat, and he saw me and he was like, and then he started beatboxing and was like, and I was like, all right. And I just started going. And it was just so much fun. Like,
Yeah,
and then when he started a cipher circle later, made sure that I was in there, and you know, just like you said, nothing negative I could say about the guy.
nothing.
And it's amazing to be able to look back and isolate those experiences and point them out. Next question I was gonna ask, you know, having this latitude that you talked about, with the studio in and the space in Joshua Tree and, you know,
Mhm.
like you mentioned, having a living quarters and having all of these different, you know, components, was that, latitude what allowed you to start your audio company, Custom Mics?
Okay, yeah. So, um, what really took shape with the making, starting to make custom microphones. So earlier we addressed the obsession with sonic signatures and with the painting with sound theme. And what I found was I started getting into boutique. Uh, I'll get audio reproductions. I'll give you an example. The best Neve 1073 preamp made today isn't made by Neve. It's made by BAE. So they're like a boutique company who makes the circuit the way it was originally designed, and they sound fantastic. And if you want the real deal, that's what you buy. I think
So
what
kind of getting like an original Shure 55 with the modifications built
Mhm.
into it.
And so basically in that line of thinking, it's like a lot of microphones. Well, I should say there are plenty of great mics on the market. There really are wonderful, incredible, amazing mics out there, and I'll shout out one of them in a minute. But the reason I started to do make my own was I well I'm trying to think of how I started collecting the capsules. So I'd find like, oh, this company makes this brass capsule, C12 style capsule, expensive stuff like a $400 capsule, right? Let's put this in one of my mics. What does it do? Oh, wow, that was cool. It sounds great. And then so I started modifying some of my own mics. The first one I modified was an original Rode NT2 from the 90s. Now, Rode makes a lot of kind of prosumerish kind of stuff, right? Like today, it's like kind of it's okay, but in the '90s, they actually made a really good mic called the NT2, which they were sued by Neumann because it looked so much like a Neumann and it sounded great. It's different from a Neumann; it doesn't have a transformer, but it had a great sound. And Neumann sued them, and there's no record of it. Like you can't buy that mic, the original NT2. So I just bought one before that had happened. I bought one and I liked it. And then I realized there were many versions of this microphone. And so this kind of opens Pandora's box. But long story short, I took one of the original ones that I bought and I added this Telefunken something 51, like a $300 capsule to it.
Every time I hear Telefunken, I think of Frank Zappa. That's just Catholic girls or
Yeah.
whichever one is getting on the bus on Joe's Garage. Sorry, so I smile every time you say Telefunken.
Well, so
Is-
so once I opened up the Pandora's box, and started to modify certain little things that I had because I have so many mics. I'm like, and it sounded fantastic. This mic that I modified, and then I thought, what are these circuits going around? Like, where do I find like the parts to build an original vintage style circuit? And I found that there are a whole slew of boutique builders and kits and things out there in the world. So I started grabbing kind of like from the different places. I'd get the circuit components from this place and this place, and the capsule from this place, and then the mic body from wherever I could find a nice mic body to be the aesthetic of it. And in doing that, I found a combination of a vintage circuit that I really like. That's a transformer balanced microphone, which anyone who likes the term mojo, will tell you that transformer mics are where it's at, right? And so this was really an answer to my clients. My artists will always ask me every time, "Whoa, what microphone? And what is this?" Whether it is one of my collection or one of the ones I've built, I listen to what they sound like and I go, oh, you should be on this mic. Oh, you should be on
And the
this.
next question is, how do I get one, or which one do I get?
Yeah. And
So
so
why
I
not
started,
supply your own?
I did. And so what happened was I was building them for myself. And I was like, because you can get it's kind of crazy to think this, but the good studio microphones, they start at three, four, $5,000, and then they go actually way up from there. So to be able to offer to my clients a mic that would cost say $4 or $5,000 for less than $2,000, and they're going to go home and use it. I mean, it's like it's been a great thing because in supporting their independent spirit, obviously I want them to come to me and record, but sometimes they're going to go to another studio. Sometimes they're going to be at their home studio. Maybe they're doing a demo, and if they get a really good capture of their vocal, it could be used in a later production, at my studio. But the point is, I'm not precious about it. So like, if people want one, I basically build them one or two or three at a time. That's it. And
Well,
they sound fantastic.
that's the way it should be. I feel like, when you're creating something like a microphone, something that's so like, because, the voice is the first instrument, right?
Hmm.
Um, for me, uh, this maybe it's because I'm a comedian or a voice actor or podcast host, but for me, my microphone is very personal.
Hmm.
Which one I use, and it's been more consistent on the show than me choosing to wear a different hat every episode or a different shirt.
Yeah.
It's been one of the most consistent things about this show has been this microphone, but at the same time, um, it's incredible to offer that to someone, not just at the rate, but also something that's bespoke and for them.
Hmm.
So that wherever they go, whatever they plug it into, it's the hardware itself that matters. And I think that's genuinely kind to offer it at not at market rate, basically,
Hmm.
but at the rate of like cost plus obviously you got to make a little bit, but
Hmm.
to go at 120 and not at 250 as far as where you're pricing it at, like, is that something that you do just because you feel like you want to get that quality merchandise into those people's hands, or is it just like personal philosophy of we lift each other up, so let's make it as accessible as possible?
I mean, it goes in just kind of with the general mo of what I'm all about, which is I would rather somebody who's like can't always afford to come to me and record, who's going to still go home and record their vocals in their closet, whatever it is, right? I'd rather that. I'll give you an example. A friend of mine, also named Tommy, recently reached out and he goes, "Hey, I've been recording at this other studio and I really like this vocal sound." He goes, um, "What kind of mic do you think I need to get this sound?" I go, "Well, I can tell that you want to have this kind of like vintage circuit transformer balance, nice capsule sound to get there's a saturation, harmonic color. There's all these words. It gets to be like wine. You could describe. There's so many ways to describe these microphones, and they really,
I ran into this same exact issue with Moore Applebaum, record masterer,
yeah,
and he's describing sounds as wide and heavy
yeah,
and fat, and
yeah.
I'm just like, but like how, like
Okay,
what? And
yeah,
so I've had a bunch of these conversations, but I'm curious like what these terms mean to you.
yeah. That's a great question because it lies at the heart of I think what the professional recording studio offers people. So, unfortunately, it does require a pretty hefty price tag to do this and to get to the place where you can even use these words. And I'll give you some of my favorite words when I'm describing like a microphone. Holographic. Is it have size? Does it have weight? Does it bring the person? Is this lens going to bring the person one to one into reality? And the hardest thing for me has been over all these years when I have friends who send me demos, or well, they'll call them, their recordings, and it's like you can hear how if you had the production, a good song is a good song. Any one of us will tell you that. That's just true. But when you get
Absolutely.
a good song and you produce it and engineer it with the best lenses, again, this is always what I say, you get the full weight and you get the full dimension, right? And the best way I would describe it is that it feels like when I know a song has come together in the studio and that the mix is getting into a really good place, it's like you can see this place where it's happening. You can actually like kind of visually almost like sense that this song is, I can see it in this like visual space where it's actually in the room with you, and it's like become its own entity. And if you have subpar converters, right? So there's so many, the signal chain, we could spend an entire episode just on signal chain
I
and
I
gain
know. I
stage.
had one question for Maor about it, and he was like, "Oh," and I was like, "I
Pandora's
don't
box, dude. It's Pandora's box because, how do I best describe this?
I mean, they're opening the doors of perception to what's possible.
And what,
To borrow a term from Robbie Krieger's former band, the
uh,
Doors.
and I played
Like
with
it's
Robbie.
that's
Yeah.
there's a reason I brought it up. But that's really what it is. What it sounds like to me as you were talking is really, what I pride myself on and try to work on all the time is lateral thinking. Like
Hmm.
we have a set scope of parameters within which we have to solve this particular issue. What are other ways that we could resolve the issue, knowing that what tools we have and what time frame we have are fixed to A, B, and C, right? What
Hmm.
are some ways we could still bend around straight lines to make happen what we want to and get the end result that we're seeking to achieve? And I think that's a magnificent thing to be in pursuit of as a producer, because
Hmm.
then no matter who you work with, kind of as you said, which I really, really love. I really love that you have to say this. The way I put it is a little harsher, is that there's two kinds of music, two genres of music, good and bad. Um, but the way that you put it, I believe, is like, what's a good song, like, or a good tune, like, or a good record. Like, good music is good music is good music, but what makes good music exceptional is when you have someone who wants to dig in there and explore laterally what the possibilities are when it comes to that end product.
Yeah, and exactly what you just said. It's those people who are behind the scenes who can get into the sonic structure of what the intent of the artist is and make that the best it can be. And I'll give you a fun example. So it's funny for me to even say this, but like when I was working with 5 Seconds of Summer, big pop band, right? They had never used all of the analog stuff in my studio. It's all the real rack equipment, and it's all directly interfaced into my interface, Pro Tools and so on. Um, but they were always recording mostly in the box from what they had explained to me, and they never really put their hands on these things, and so I kind of had to. I opened up this little bit of the world for them, and they just were blown away, and they loved it because they can hear, as anyone who will tell you this will tell you, is that the the weight and the definition and the character of the really nice stuff that's tried and true, that's been used on records for 50 years, whether it's an API or an EMI circuit or a Neve circuit or a Trident circuit, um, those things create this definition and color. um, I will say one thing that's unique about my studio is I don't do a one console sound. I don't do it. I have a hybrid of all of these different circuits running one system. Does
Now
that make sense?
explain to our layperson, because our average listener, reader, or viewer may not understand exactly what that means. So if you wouldn't mind breaking that
Yeah.
down just a little bit, because I think it's worth spending a little time there, because you're the first, for the record, for the benefit of the context for our listeners,
Hmm.
readers, and viewers, you are the first producer that I've interviewed who records in a hybrid channel.
Hmm.
Um, so please talk to us a little bit about the difference between mono and hybrid is and how you go about doing what you do.
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
so
No,
curious to hear more about
I,
this.
it actually is confusing for some people who don't understand the approach. After 25 plus years of engineering and recording, I got to use, whether I was at Dave Grohl's studio on his Neve, or I was in San Francisco working on a different console or an SSL or an API. Each one of those has a signature that when you combine them, you get a front end separation. So if I'm using one desk, let's just say I'm working on a SSL console, you're going to get that sound, right? If I'm working on just a Neve console, I'm going to get the Neve sound, right?
Mhm.
Well, what I started to realize at some point, maybe 10 years ago, was that I liked different boards for different things. And I liked intersecting the sound of a creamy kind of EMI circuit, right? As an overhead mic, right? We're talking specifically right now about what we call the preamp section of a console. If you have one desk, you have one sound. And for me, I get fucking bored. It bores me to tears. And so I started to like really go, well, I love Neve on a snare drum, but I love the Trident on a background vocal mic with a LA2A compressor, or whatever. And it's just there's so many combinations. And if you look at if you go to the website to joshuatreerecordingstudio.com and you go to the equipment page, I mean, yeah, hundreds of thousands of dollars of equipment. That sound that I'm offering gives you those little pieces of all the classics, and you combine them. It's honestly it's pure magic when you combine all those things.
And it's really reminiscent of something that I can only really recall one other artist, like, pinpointing being like, "Oh, this is something that I've heard, that I've heard multiple times that I know to be true," of combining factors in such a way, and that's the way Jerry Garcia liked his guitars. There were
Mm-hmm.
elements of the Strat that he loved, and there were elements of the PRS that he really loved, and there was no guitar that combined the longer neck with some of the way like, the mechanics of the other guitar, and until, of course, until Doug Irwin, made them, and Leo Elliott, now Scarlet Fire Guitars, friend of the show, makes the replicas in, cooperation with Doug. Um, but, that's really, who I was thinking of when you said that, because he was kind of like, "Well, I love this part of this guitar and this part of this guitar. Let's just build one that has all the things that I like."
Yeah.
And, people talk about Jerry's tone all the time, and don't get me wrong, he was a hell of one of the greatest guitar players of all time, let alone, songwriters. But part of the magic of that tone was that his guitars are truly one of a kind.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
He played instruments that were built for him, and I think in production in the same way, when you have, all of this gear that you're talking about that you've arranged,
Mm-hmm.
you are getting something truly unique, and I think that is something that's the main reason why folks keep coming back.
Yeah, no, the guitar analogy is perfect because when you get into the kinds of things that consoles, all the best consoles at Abbey Road, it was the EMI, right? I'll give you an example. Queen recorded Bohemian Rhapsody on a Trident A range. That sound of the vocal, that just crisp sound, is very much A range sort of territory. And then of course Tom Petty did all of the most of his records on the Sound City Neve, which has that Sound City Neve sound, which I've worked on that desk. It's incredible. It's like the first time I went to Dave Grohl's studio. It's the in-house engineer. He's like, okay, sometimes it cuts out. He's like, but you just got to hit it. I'm like, what? You know, friggin' $250,000 board or whatever it is. And he goes, yeah, if channel 12 drops, just hit it. And I'm like, okay. So I'm recording, with this super group. It was like a whole mix. There's a whole nother story. Glenn from the Sex Pistols, original bass player. Clem, the drummer from Blondie on drums. God, I'm trying to remember. Gary from Generation. X. It's just this whole super band thing. I happen to be in the studio. I know I have so many stories, dude. We'll do another one because I got to tell you about getting drunk with Alan
We're gonna get
Parsons.
another episode
Okay,
in, folks. Like, all the links are gonna be in the description,
yeah.
but we're gonna do another episode for just stories.
But let me. We'll do stories after. Finish the thought. So it is a little bit different approach, but it's something that I landed on in the studio to have. Look, it's a 36 input system that I have, and I have the flavors of these different consoles blended together. And what I think a lot of engineers who know what they're doing will tell you is what I'm going to tell you, which is that real mixing is what you actually do it going in front end, what I call front end mixing. So that means you're getting 90+% of your sound right there out of the gate going into the system, right? And so in my system, it's all the analog hardware, which goes directly to the interface, but also monitored through my vintage console. But my vintage console, the preamps are essentially mostly bypassed so that I can use all of these other outboard pieces to create this hybrid desk. The preamps, again, they're like the lens. I don't know if I went over everybody's head.
But well, no. Just to put it into context. So the preamp, for example, to put it into to relate it to what I do, is what I plug my microphone into and is what translates the sound to the computer. Yep. So the quality of my preamp determines the quality of the way that the sound is transferred, the cable to microphone as well. But part of what factors into how the sound is transferred to the computer is the hub right there, is the interface. Mm-hmm. And being able to have multiple options and the option to combine them mm-hmm. is something that I think is far and away one of the cooler things I've heard in 3+ years and over 100 episodes of doing this show. There's so much more we could talk about and so many things that are still in these notes, but our time is up for this week. Tommy, thank you so much for being on Secondhand Talent. Is there anything you'd like to leave us with before we end this week's episode?
Yes, there is. Don't stop creating, because I think the sort of quote unquote, the thing that feeds you the most to your core is doing whatever craft it is. We all got to work and pay bills and all that, but just remember to do the things that actually serve, who you are at your core. And I'm lucky that I get to help people do their thing and then just, facilitate that somehow. So, but yeah, thanks for having me, man. It was fun. There's this, we're just scratching the surface. I could go on forever, but we'll do another one at some point.
We're just scratching the surface here because there's just so much more to go over, and I'm looking forward to going into it. Folks, this is Steiner with another episode of Secondhand Talent. This is Tommy Dietrick from Joshua Tree Recording Studio, and this is another episode of Secondhand Talent. We'll see you next Wednesday.
Awesome.
That's a podcast.